Let me tell you something most people won't say out loud. When a man ignores you, it messes with your mind. You start overthinking, replaying conversations, questioning your worth, wondering what you did wrong. And the more he pulls away, the more you feel pulled in. But here's the truth, raw, unfiltered, and maybe a little uncomfortable. His silence is not confusion, it's communication. Yeah, you heard that right. A man may not text you back, may not call, may disappear without explanation. But that is the message. And today we're going to break down exactly what that silence really means. So you stop guessing, stop chasing, and start seeing the situation for what it truly is. You see, one of the biggest mistakes women make is trying to translate silence into something deeper than what it really is. You start telling yourself, maybe he's just busy, maybe he's going through something, maybe he doesn't know how to express his feelings. And while you're busy creating these soft explanations to protect your emotions, the truth is standing right in front of you. Quiet, simple, and undeniable. When a man is genuinely interested in you, you don't have to question it. You don't have to sit there staring at your phone, wondering when he'll reply. You don't have to send a second message just to remind him you exist. You don't have to convince yourself that mixed signals mean something meaningful. Real interest is not confusing. Real interest is consistent. It shows up without you begging for it. Think about anything you truly care about in your own life. When something matters to you, you find a way. You make time. You prioritize it, even when life gets busy. You don't forget it, you don't ignore it, and you definitely don't leave it hanging without explanation. That same logic applies here. When a man values you, when he feels something real for you, you won't feel like an option. You'll feel like a priority, and not because he says it, but because he proves it through his actions. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because sometimes deep down you already know this. You've seen what effort looks like before, maybe from another man, maybe even from him in the beginning. And that's the part that confuses you the most. You start thinking, he used to care, he used to call, he used to show up, so what changed? And instead of accepting that his level of interest has shifted, you hold on to the version of him that no longer exists. But people reveal themselves over time. In the beginning, effort is easy. There's excitement, curiosity, the thrill of something new. But consistency, that's where truth lives. Consistency shows you who a person really is when the excitement settles. And if that consistency turns into silence, distance, and lack of effort, then that's not an action, that's clarity. C, a man doesn't wake up one day and forget how to communicate. He doesn't suddenly lose the ability to send a message or make a call. What changes is his motivation. What changes is how much he wants to invest. And when that investment drops, his actions reflect it immediately. Not gradually, not subtly, clearly. But instead of seeing it as clarity, you see it as confusion. You start overanalyzing every little thing. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I should give him space. And while self-reflection is important, there's a difference between growth and self-blame. When you constantly assume that his lack of effort is your fault, you start shrinking yourself just to fit into a space where you're not being valued. Let me tell you something that might shift your perspective. The right man doesn't require you to become smaller to keep him. He doesn't require you to silence your needs, suppress your feelings, or pretend you're okay with inconsistency. When a man is genuinely interested, your presence in his life feels natural to him, not like a burden he needs to escape from. And here's another thing you need to understand. Effort is not something you should have to request repeatedly. Yes, communication matters. And yes, expressing your needs is healthy. But there's a difference between expressing once and begging continuously. When you have to keep reminding someone to treat you right, what you're really doing is negotiating your worth with someone who has already decided how much they're willing to give. Now think about how this dynamic affects you emotionally. Every time he ignores you, it creates anxiety. Every delayed response feels like rejection. Every moment of silence makes you question yourself. And slowly, without even realizing it, you become emotionally dependent on his attention. His messages make your day. His silence ruins it. That's not connection. That's imbalance. Because in a healthy situation, communication doesn't feel like a reward you have to earn. It feels like a normal part of the connection. You're not constantly waiting, guessing, or hoping. You're simply experiencing the relationship as it naturally flows. But when a man's interest is low, everything starts to feel uncertain. You're always trying to read between the lines instead of just seeing what's clearly in front of you. And what's in front of you is this. If he's ignoring you, he's showing you that you are not at the top of his priorities. It doesn't mean you're not valuable. It doesn't mean you're not worthy. It simply means that he is not choosing you the way you deserve to be chosen. That distinction matters because too many women take a man's lack of effort and turn it into a reflection of their own worth. They think, if I were more attractive, more understanding, more patient, he wouldn't ignore me. But the truth is, the right man doesn't need you to become someone else to treat you right. He meets you with effort because he wants to, not because you convinced him to. And once you truly understand that, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing clarity from someone who is already giving you an answer through their actions. You stop trying to decode behavior that is actually very simple. You stop investing emotional energy into someone who is not investing back. Now, this is where things start to get a little deeper. And if you're really honest with yourself, you might recognize this pattern immediately. Because sometimes it's not just that he's ignoring you, it's that he's learned he can ignore you and nothing changes. See, human behavior is shaped by what gets rewarded. If someone does something and there are no consequences, only benefits, they'll keep doing it. It's that simple. And in relationships, this plays out more often than people like to admit. Think about it. The first time he took hours to reply, what did you do? You waited. Maybe you felt a little uneasy. Maybe you overthought it. But when he finally responded, you replied back like everything was normal. No shift in your energy, no boundary, no pause, just acceptance. Then it happened again. This time, maybe he disappeared for a day. And again, when he came back, you were still there. Maybe you even felt relieved. Maybe you told yourself, okay, he's back now. Everything's fine. But what you didn't realize is that in that moment, you were teaching him something very important. You were teaching him that your presence is guaranteed, regardless of his effort. Now, understand this clearly. People don't test boundaries by asking. They test them through behavior. He doesn't sit there thinking, let me formally ask if I can ignore her. No. He pulls back, goes quiet, creates distance, and then he watches what happens next. And what happens next is everything. If he disappears and comes back to the same version of you, available, responsive, understanding, forgiving without question, then in his mind, there's no problem. In fact, there's a benefit. Because now he knows he can give less and still keep you. That's where ignoring you shifts from being a slutty behavior to a pattern. It becomes something he uses consciously or unconsciously because it works in his favor. And I know what you might be thinking, but I don't want to play games. I just want to be real. And that's valid. Nobody's saying you should become cold, manipulative, or fake. But being real doesn't mean being without standards. Being genuine doesn't mean accepting behavior that drains you. There's a difference between kindness and self-abandonment. And a lot of women cross that line without even realizing it. Because what happens is you start adjusting yourself to maintain the connection. You respond faster, even when he doesn't. You stay emotionally available, even when he's inconsistent. You give him understanding that he hasn't earned. And slowly, you lower the bar just to keep him around. But here's the truth. When you lower the bar, people don't suddenly rise to meet it. They relax into it. So now, he's comfortable. He knows you'll respond. He knows you'll be there. He knows that even if he disappears for a while, he can come back and pick up where he left off. And because there's no resistance, no shift, no consequence, there's no reason for him to change. And that's the part that hurts the most. Because from your perspective, it feels like you're giving your best. You're being patient, understanding, supportive. But from his perspective, it feels like there's no risk of losing you. And when there's no risk, there's no urgency. Let me put it to you like this. Imagine someone always shows up late, and every time they do, you just smile and say, it's okay. No matter how late they are, no matter how often it happens. You never address it, never change your response. What do you think happens over time? They keep showing up late, not because they don't know it's wrong, but because they know it's tolerated. The same principle applies here. Ignoring you becomes something he continues to do, not necessarily because he wants to hurt you, but because there's nothing stopping him from doing it. Now, this doesn't mean he's sitting there plotting against you. Sometimes it's not that calculated. Sometimes it's just learned behavior. He's gotten used to a dynamic where he gives minimal effort and still receives your time, your attention, your energy. And habits like that don't break on their own. What makes this even more complicated is that every time he comes back after ignoring you, he might be charming, he might be sweet, he might give you just enough attention to pull you back in. And that creates a cycle. Distance followed by affection, silence followed by engagement. That cycle is powerful because it keeps you emotionally hooked. You start focusing on the highs, the moments when he does show up, and you downplay the lows. You tell yourself, see, he does care sometimes. And those sometimes moments become enough to keep you invested. But consistency is what defines real interest, not occasional effort, because anyone can show up once in a while. Anyone can send a nice message after disappearing. That doesn't take commitment. That doesn't take intention. What takes real interest is showing up consistently without you having to chase it, question it, or wait for it. And when that consistency is missing, and you continue to accept the inconsistency, the dynamic becomes one-sided. You're investing more. You're caring more. You're thinking more. And he's doing less because he's learned he can. At some point, you have to step back and ask yourself a real question. Not an emotional one, but a clear, honest one. What am I teaching him about how to treat me? Because whether you realize it or not, your reactions are setting the tone. If you accept silence, you're teaching him that silence is okay. If you accept inconsistency, you're teaching him that inconsistency is enough. If you stay available no matter how he behaves, you're teaching him that your availability doesn't depend on his effort. And once that lesson is learned, it doesn't change unless you change it. Not through words, not through explanations, not through emotional conversations, but through your actions. Because actions are what created the pattern, and actions are the only thing that can break it. And the moment you stop rewarding behavior that doesn't meet your standards, that's when the entire dynamic starts to shift. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that not everything is about you. When a man pulls away emotionally, goes silent, becomes inconsistent, or starts ignoring you, your first instinct is usually self-blame. You start replaying every conversation, every message, every moment, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You think maybe you were too much, maybe not enough, maybe you said the wrong thing, maybe you should have been more patient, more understanding, more perfect in some way. But here's where reality needs to step in and interrupt that spiral. Not every man who withdraws from you is doing it because of something you did. Sometimes you're not dealing with confusion, dealing with capacity. Emotional capacity, maturity, readiness, stability. And those are things you cannot build inside someone else by overgiving yourself. There are men who are simply not available in the way you want them to be, not because you are unworthy, but because they are internally unprepared. They might like you. They might even enjoy your presence. But liking someone and being able to show up consistently for them are two completely different things. And this is where many women get stuck. Because instead of seeing emotional unavailability for what it is, they turn it into a challenge. They start thinking, if I just understand him more, if I give him space, if I don't pressure him, he'll eventually open up. So you slow down your needs, you soften your boundaries, you become more patient than you actually feel. And slowly, without noticing, you start building your emotional world around someone who is not building anything stable with you in return. You're trying to create connection where there is no foundation for it yet. And what makes this even more complicated is that emotionally unavailable people don't always look unavailable in the beginning. In fact, they can feel very intense at first. There can be attention, excitement, deep conversations, even emotional closeness. But when real consistency is required, when communication, accountability, and emotional presence are needed, that's where the gap appears. That's when they start pulling back, not always dramatically, sometimes subtly. Slower replies, shorter conversations, less effort, less initiation. And instead of recognizing that shift as a signal, you try to compensate for it. You try harder. You become more understanding, more forgiving, more available, because in your mind, if you can just hold it together long enough, he'll come back to how he was in the beginning. But what you're really doing is trying to emotionally carry a connection that he is not equally invested in carrying with you. And that creates an imbalance that slowly drains you. Because when someone is not emotionally available, your effort doesn't fix them. It just delays your clarity. It keeps you attached longer than you should be. It keeps you hoping instead of seeing. And the most painful part is that while you're trying to understand, you start misunderstanding yourself. You start thinking your needs are too much. That wanting consistency is being demanding. That wanting communication is being clingy. That expecting emotional presence is asking for too much. So you begin to shrink your standards just to stay connected to someone who cannot meet you where you are. But real love, real connection does not require you to become smaller. It requires mutual presence, mutual effort, mutual emotional responsibility. And when that is missing, no amount of patience will create it, because emotional unavailability is not something you can fix with understanding alone. You can understand someone deeply and still not be able to build something stable with them. You can empathize with their past, their fears, their patterns, but that does not automatically translate into a healthy present connection. At some point, you have to separate empathy from self-abandonment. You can understand him without losing yourself in the process. You can care about his emotional limitations without turning those limitations into your responsibility to fix. Because when you start trying to heal someone through your love, you quietly step into a role that drains you over time. You become the emotional stabilizer in a dynamic that should be shared. You become the one who adjusts, accommodates, waits, explains, forgives, and holds everything together while he remains inconsistent. And that is not partnership, that is imbalance. And what often keeps women stuck in this cycle is potential. You don't fall in love with who he is right now. You fall in love with who he could be if he just opened up, if he just tried a little more, if he just stopped running. But potential is not a relationship. Potential is imagination. And you cannot build emotional security in imagination. You can only build it in consistent behavior. So when a man is emotionally unavailable, the most important thing to understand is this. You are not dealing with a problem you can solve by being better, softer, or more patient. You are dealing with a limitation that exists within him, not within your effort. And the longer you stay trying to fix what is not yours to fix, the more you drift away from your own emotional center. You start waiting for clarity that never fully arrives. You start tolerating confusion because you're hoping it will eventually turn into commitment. You start measuring your worth by how much access he gives you instead of how consistent he is with you. And over time, that changes how you see yourself. Because when someone cannot meet you emotionally, and you keep trying to make it work anyway, you slowly begin to question your own needs. You start asking, am I asking for too much? When in reality, you are just asking the wrong person. The truth is simple, even if it's not easy. You cannot build emotional stability with someone who is not emotionally stable with you. And no amount of patience can turn absence into presence or inconsistency into security. At some point, clarity comes not from understanding him more, but from understanding yourself enough to stop choosing situations that require you to constantly shrink your emotional needs just to stay in them. This is the part most people don't want to hear because it removes all excuses, all confusion, and all emotional comfort. It puts the focus exactly where it belongs, not on his behavior anymore, but on your response to it. Because when a man realizes he can ignore you and still keep you, he is no longer guessing your limits. He is learning them. And what you tolerate silently becomes the standard he operates with. At first, it may not even look intentional. He ignores you, pulls away, comes back later like nothing happened, maybe even acts sweet for a moment. And you accept it. You don't bring it up, or if you do, it's soft, careful, emotional. You don't want to ruin the vibe. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want to push him further away. So you adjust yourself instead of addressing the behavior. And this is where the shift begins. Because in his mind, something very important just got confirmed. There is no real consequence to disappearing. There is no accountability that follows his silence. There is no boundary that gets enforced. There is only access available whenever he returns. So slowly, whether he realizes it or not, he becomes more relaxed in his effort. Less urgency, less consistency, less responsibility to show up properly. Because the system is clear. He can step away and still step back in without losing you. And this is where emotional imbalance is created. Not in the moment he ignores you, but in the moment you accept it repeatedly without changing how you respond. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't just respect what you say. They respond to what you allow. You can tell someone you want consistency, you want communication, you want effort, but if your actions still welcome inconsistency, silence, and neglect without consequence, then your words become irrelevant. The behavior becomes the real message. And over time, a pattern forms. He pulls away, you wait. He disappears, you stay available, he returns. You respond like nothing happened, and every cycle reinforces the same lesson. Access to you is not protected by effort. It is unconditional. That's where the testing starts. Not always conscious, but natural in human behavior. People test limits, not because they're evil, but because they're learning the structure of the connection. They are trying to understand what is required to maintain access, attention, and emotional availability. And if the answer is nothing changes when I withdraw, then withdrawal becomes a safe behavior. This is why some situations feel like a loop. The inconsistency doesn't end because it is not being interrupted. It is being absorbed into the dynamic. And the longer this continues, the more emotionally confusing it becomes for you. Because you start experiencing two versions of him. The version that ignores you and the version that comes back occasionally with attention, charm, or affection. And your mind naturally clings to the better moments because they feel like proof that things are still okay. But those moments are not proof of consistency. They are interruptions in inconsistency. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Because what keeps you attached is not what he does every day. It's what he does sometimes. Those sometimes moments create hope, and hope makes you overlook patterns. Meanwhile, your emotional energy keeps adjusting to his unpredictability. You start checking your phone more, overthinking delays, reading into tone, waiting for shifts in mood. You become reactive to his availability instead of grounded in your own standards. And slowly, without realizing it, your peace starts depending on his behavior. That is where the real cost is. Not just that he is inconsistent, but that your emotional stability starts sinking with his inconsistency. And here is the part that changes everything if you truly understand it. The only thing that disrupts this cycle is not explaining yourself more, not waiting longer, not loving harder, but changing what happens when the pattern repeats. Because behavior only changes when it stops being rewarded. If silence leads to continued access, silence will continue. If inconsistency leads to forgiveness without change, inconsistency will continue. If disappearing has no emotional or relational cost, it will remain an option. But the moment there is a shift in your response, not anger, not drama, but clarity, the pattern begins to break. That shift can look like emotional detachment. It can look like reduced availability. It can look like no longer reacting the same way when he returns after disappearing. It can look like you no longer treating inconsistency as normal because now the message is different. Now, silence doesn't lead to unchanged access. Now, inconsistency is noticed, not ignored. Now, effort is required to maintain connection, not assumed. And when that happens, two things usually become clear very quickly. Either the person steps up and becomes consistent because they value the connection enough to meet the standard, or they withdraw further because they were only comfortable in a low-effort dynamic. And both outcomes give you clarity. But the key thing to understand is this. You are not punishing anyone. You are simply aligning your behavior with your emotional needs. You are no longer operating from fear of losing them. You are operating from respect for yourself. Because the real question was never, why is he ignoring me? The real question is, why did I stay available in a pattern that made me feel ignored? And the moment you start answering that honestly, the entire dynamic stops being about decoding him and starts being about reclaiming yourself.